Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 10 of the Common Knowledge Podcast. I'm your host, Brandon Clark, and joined with me today is my co-host, Sean Stokes. Sean, how are you doing?
Great. How are you? How have you been this week?
Good. It's been a interesting week. Had a lot going on, and I've been home with a sick child for the last couple days. So,
yeah, Valentine's week. I've been running around trying to get that together. Went off without a hitch, though.
Nice. Just get married, and then you don't have to do that anymore.
I'll take your word for it. I'm sure there's married people that'll disagree with you.
Yeah, it probably doesn't have anything to do with being married as much as it depends on who I'm married to.
Mm-hmm.
Like, neither of us care about Valentine's Day. We show our love for each other 365 days of the year.
If you say so.
All right. Well, hey, we've got an awesome show lined up today for you guys. Really awesome topic. Really, I think, crucial topic to any Magic player's repertoire of skills.
I think particularly when you're brewing, but we'll get to the topic in just a minute.
Yeah. First, let's quick shout out to our sponsor, of course, puremtgo.com. Check them out for articles and other MTG podcasts, deck lists, competitive MTGO pricing. And it looks like going on the website, they're looking for writers. So if you're interested in writing, you can go onto the page and you can sign up right there and go through that whole process and start writing for them. So give them a check out.
Yeah, they're great.
So you bought cards?
Yeah. Good. Nothing to complain about, which is no news is good news, right?
Right. Yeah, so check them out, puremtgo.com. All right, well, let's jump into the show, starting with our card of the week. Sean, what is our card of the week? Hit us.
Our card of the week is Prophetic Prism. Prophetic Prism is a 2-mana artifact, so just 2 generic to cast. When it enters the battlefield, you draw a card, and you can pay 1 mana into it to get a mana of any color. So it's a mana filter / fixer, as well as a cantrip. There's no card selection, but it does replace itself.
Yeah. What are so this is like, you look at this card and you think like, okay, it costs 2 mana to cast, and then I have to pay a mana to get a mana. And when you look at it, like, the only real upside of the card looks like you draw a card when you cast it, or when it comes into play. But what are some of the niches that this card fills in the decks that are wanting to utilize it?
So usually the decks that utilize it either care that it's an artifact, they want something that they can bounce with something like Core Skyfisher, or they can flicker it somehow, and they're usually very mana, like colored, what is that, color weight intensive decks. The other deck that really just loves this card is, of course, Tron, because you can pay for the Prophetic Prism. It'll help you find a Tron piece, and then for the rest of the game, you don't really have to do anything extra. Your colors are just going to be better and more reliable. So there's a deck building cost of like, you need to have a payoff and a reason to play it, but it does its job better than pretty much everything in the format. Because the other obvious comparison is something like Chromatic Star or Chromatic Sphere. They are 1 mana less, but the repeatability is what really makes Prophetic Prism like the best.
Okay. I think it's also very important to note its card type. It's an artifact. And so that plays a large role in the decks that utilize it for gaining metal craft.
And usually with an artifact, the drawback is you're afraid of hate. It doesn't die to Gorilla Shaman, really. That feels really bad, paying 4 mana to blow it up, which it's not undoable, but like you've already lost that game most of the time anyway. So they're not going to really board in hate for your prophetic prisms. And it feels really bad firing off like an ancient grudge at one of them. They will if they have an extra one, but I think it's a really safe card to play, especially because it has that redraw feature.
Yeah, it's not really integral to the basic strategy of the decks that are playing it. And so boarding in artifact hate with the intent of killing cards like Prophetic Prism or the Star or Chromatic Sphere, it just seems really loose, you know? So it's protected in that way, like you've said.
And I have seen it used with our last week's card of the week, Monastery Mentor. Is that what it's called? The lifelink prowess guy.
Seeker of the Way.
Seeker of the Way. I wrote Monastery Mentor like a...
Monastery Mentor is definitely not pauper legal.
Yeah, but it does trigger it.
I guess, but I mean, in the format that you're playing Monastery Mentor, you've got better artifacts of the 0 mana variety to trigger your mentor.
Yeah, so not that card, but Seeker of the Way, it does trigger off of this. Not very many prowess creatures, but it does come up every once in a while.
Yeah, so that's card of the week for us, Prophetic Prism. We thought that given the topic of this show and some of the decks that had a good showing in Pauper Challenges this past week, we thought that Prophetic Prism was a good card to touch on. So that said, let's transition then into our main topic of the show, which is building a mana base. We touched on it earlier. This is one of the more important skills that a Magic player can have, especially when they're brewing, but not only brewing, but also in tuning a deck. A lot of times fine-tuning a deck comes down to like knowing when to take a land out, when to add a land, when to mix with the color combination that your lands can produce. So we're going to touch on that. We're going to hope that this can kind of be a level up moment for you listeners at home. So let's just jump right into the meat of the show then. Building a better mana base.
I think this is a big topic for Pauper because I want to say it is the most difficult format to build a mana base in because you have to consider things like playing tap lands, where in virtually every other format of the game, you can completely avoid tap lands and you can be in 2 colors. So there's like a real cost.
Or more than 2 colors.
Yeah, which due to how our mana bases work, you just don't see those decks in Pauper because the deck building cost is too high. Except for, there are special exceptions like Affinity and Tron that they end up running Prophetic Prism and Springleaf Drum and things like that just to get those extra colors.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely right. The mana restrictions of the format definitely dictate one, not only how your mana base is crafted, but 2, how the overall deck itself is made. Because I think a lot of times, I want to get your opinion on this too, but I think that a lot of times players build a deck. These are all the awesome spells I want to play. Okay, now how do I make a mana base work for this deck? But a lot of times what should happen is we should look at our mana and what's available to us and try to create a repertoire of spells that suits that mana base.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't agree with that more. Like in the show notes, I have written uh choose a better deck that fits a better mana base, like a faster one, rather than choosing a deck and then just building that mana base around it, because your deck can get really clunky and really slow.
Yeah. So would you say though that in brewing in particular, step one is looking at the mana that's available?
No, I would say no, because a lot of
Okay.
the times with brewing, step one is you find a card interaction or a theme that you want to go with, and then I think the next thing you do is you say, is this realistic? Can I get there in time? Is the deck building cost too high? Do I need to cut something? So it's kind of, there isn't really a thing that you need to do first. It's just something to be considering when you're choosing those cards, because I think that's where most decks start is I want to play these couple of cards. Let's make it work.
Okay. Yeah, and I think that especially in standard, when standard gets shaken up and a set rotates out, new sets come in, probably one of the first things players look at is what mana is available to them. But Pauper doesn't really get shaken up that much, does it? So we kind of already just know how our lands work and what different types of mana bases work for what strategy. So that I guess that kind of makes brewing a little easier. Like part of our job's already done, and we can focus more on those strategies we want to try to make work.
Yeah, I mean, unless you're coming up with something especially spicy.
Yeah.
So we do have some points that I think you should also consider when constructing a mana base, and we'll get into some more specifics later. But the first thing I wanted to cover is your color weight. You need to consider how many colored symbols are on your cards, and you need to know like when they're going to need to come down. So, like having your main color be just a random color, say blue, and then your 2-drop is green. Like, of course, that's not going to work. So you do need to change your deck to fit what a realistic mana base can do.
Yeah, and color weight is also commonly referred to as like the mana curve, right? So like we're thinking, no?
Color weight is like the number of colored symbols on your card, whereas mana curve is, well, they're similar, and then mana curve is like when you play them, and they do need to they work together.
Yeah. Okay. I've just never used the term mana weight. I've always, when I thought of my mana curve, I've always taken into consideration not only CMC, but the amount of little colored pips in that converted mana cost. But yeah, I can see how they're different, but then work kind of one and the same at the same time.
And like the reason I'm bringing up color weight is we have access to the only dual lands we have access to are the gain lands and
the bounce lands
and the bounce lands
and
but
the guild gates.
Yeah. And
we're probably not playing guild gates. I mean, I've seen a few decks that play like one guild gate when they really need an extra source, but the game lands are just strictly better. So
it's decks with a really high color weight of like, say, instead of having all of your spells be like 2 generic and then a white and then maybe 1 generic and a green, if you're playing all 1 mana spells, they tend to all be, I need 1 of this color, 1 of this color, 1 of this color, etc. So every color that you use has to be the right color. And that's where you end up having to use those dual lands.
Right.
Another thing that can help you maybe get away from the dual lands are fixers. notably that prophetic prism we just talked about, and abundant growth. There's not. There's.
I would also say that the Evolving Wilds, Terramorphic Expanse, and Ash Barrens also fall into that range, right?
Of being fixers?
Yeah.
Yeah,
they're
but
fixers that can help draw you away from that having to put dual lands in your deck. Because like if we look at those mana bases that are playing Evolving Wilds, Ash Barrens, they typically don't have any dual lands in them at all, with the exception of like familiars. But that's because I think their color weight is very heavy, right, in what they're trying to do. But for the most part, yeah, because they're like a bunch of colors, aren't they? And then they're just
but here's the thing about their color weight is they don't need those other colors until a little bit later, and they need very little amounts of them. So if they have one swamp in their deck, that's all they'll ever need. They don't need to go, a bunch of black spells. Although they do also play like the bounce lands, so they can have access to multiple black symbols in a turn. It's what am I trying to say here? Like if you have a lot of generic symbols in your deck, I would say that not going with dual lands is more acceptable.
Okay.
Another thing I want to cover before I'm just going to go down a big list of all of the lands we have access to and when you want to be using that type of thing. But before we get to that, another thing you want to consider is the number of lands you're playing in your deck. That's you need to consider on which turn you need to hit how many lands. Is it a big deal if you don't hit that land drop number 4? If your deck can survive on 2 to 3, it's usually better, but there are payoff cards that can push you to want more. And things that can reduce the number of lands that you're playing in your deck are cantrips and ramp. Do you think there's anything else? I mean, that's the only things that I've ever seen reduce the number of lands.
Well, that and having a really low curve or CMC. Like if like you said, if realistically I only need to get to 2 or 3 mana, I can probably skimp a land or 2. But if I have to hit my 4th land by turn 4, then you need to probably go heavier on your lands to make sure that you can naturally do that without having to rely on cantrips or ramp, because sometimes you just don't draw the cantrips or the ramps you need, and you need to naturally be able to find all those lands. But the cantrips and the ramp do reduce that. So like I would say that, like, example, if your deck needs to hit your 4th land by turn 4 and you've got 8 cantrips in your deck and 4 mana elves, like I would say you can probably play 22 lands. Does that seem
that
realistic?
Seems like a little bit much. You said you're playing elves and cantrips?
Yeah, I guess there's probably no decks that play elves and cantrips, but
just for like, say someone's making a brew, I would say that you could play, if you have to hit 4 and you're playing both cantrips and ramp, I could see that being like
I would say like
even, because like you can be on like the decks that run cantrip and ramp, you can start with 1 land in your opener and that's all of a sudden keepable, because you can get to 2, you can get to 3, because you know that you're going to have these draws, especially the powerful draw cards like Ponder Preordain that let you choose what you're going to get instead of something like a Think Twice.
Yeah, and having ramp probably reduces that number even more. I would think, just because you don't have to draw that land. So it's like if you've got 20 lands in your deck and then 4 mana elves, you've got 24 mana sources. So that I think reduces the number of lands you can play even more. But in a deck that's just utilizing the cantrips, I still would err on the side of heavier, just because like when you get down to it, like 1920 is not a lot of lands when you think about it. And like you said, when we have these more powerful cantrips that have filtering capabilities like Ponder, Preordain, Brainstorm, we can throw away excess lands. So we're safer to play heavier on our lands. So I don't know. I've always erred on the side of playing more lands. I feel like statistically you get mana screwed more often than you flood. And that's especially the case when you have powerful cantrips like we do in this format.
Yeah, and I think one other thing to consider about like the number of lands you need to put in your deck is, can your later game afford to keep hitting lands? Like, is that okay? Because I've played decks where there's really no huge source of card advantage, and then it's like really grindy, and then late game you end up drawing one of those lands, and you're just like, oh, that's awful.
Well, see, that sounds to me more like a flaw in deck design than the lands, because I still think that in the type of deck that we're talking about, we want a heavier land count so that we hit those land drops early so we stay alive, because we want to be able to cast our spells efficiently on time to get us to those late game cards where we're casting spells like Forbidden Alchemy, right? Like we're casting those bigger spells that help mitigate our flood. They're cards that are, we're going to see so many cards in our library that we're bound to see a few extra lands, but we're also seeing a large mix of spells with that. And so if you're at that point where your deck gets to a grind, and that's what it's supposed to be doing, you're supposed to be getting yourself to the late game, and you're flooding out, that sounds to me more like a flaw in deck design than playing too many lands.
I just know that you can really game how your deck works by constructing it in a way that doesn't require so many lands. So instead of playing card advantage sources, you just get to play more actual cards. You don't have to have those eaten up by deck slots. And usually that's like something that can do that is obviously something like Stompy, where you're just playing 1 or 2 drops that do something stronger. And that, that's also feeding off of Curve. I just think that's a good way to exploit just how to build a deck.
Sure. So should we talk about the types of lands available to pauper players, whether you're a paper pauper player or an online pauper player? I don't think it actually changes, right? There are no.
I think there's one card that you would consider, but I think it's banned if you're actually playing paper pauper, according to a lot of ban lists. The one that I've only seen is the Professor's paper pauper ban list. It's just like an additional couple cards that you may not want to play. And the card I'm talking about is Desert. If you're not familiar with Desert, you can tap it and deal a damage to target creature that dealt damage to you this turn. And it doesn't sacrifice or anything, and I believe it can also tap for a colorless mana. Well, I'm gonna check this. I don't want to say something stupid. Yeah, okay. It can make a colorless mana, and that card's just absurd. It really just shuts off aggro decks, because you can just build a control deck that if you gain enough life, eventually you'll be able to just kill all their creatures with your land and not use up any resources. But anyway, let's not talk about a card we can't play.
Right, because that card's not on Magic Online, or it's not printed at common on Magic Online.
It's not printed at common on Magic Online. You can get them. but you can't play
Yeah.
them.
And I think we just both recommend, even if you're playing Paper Pauper, just follow the Magic Online ban list.
Yes.
Like if it doesn't exist on Magic Online, it doesn't exist in Paper as far as we're concerned.
Yeah, it does get a little confusing for new players, but there are tools you can give them to just see if a card is in Paper or on Magic Online. Anyway, the first type of mana base, like the first archetype of mana base that I would like to cover, is the basic land mana base. There's a couple. There's of course the monocolor where all you're doing is playing like 16 forests or just a whole bunch of mountains. There are cards you can supplement in there that we'll cover later, like the cycling lands, and sometimes you can sneak in a utility land that's colorless. But I want to say one of the easiest ways to build a deck is just choose a color, stick within that color. Your mana base is going to be good, and your deck is going to be fast. The other kind of basic land mana base that you can do is if you're doing two colors, you can do like the Evolving Wilds, Terramorphic Expanse, Ash Barrens package. It makes your mana base a lot faster because you can just you hit more basic lands and you're just gonna be able to play your cards on curve. You're not forced to play those cards as tap lands. Of course, like Evolving Wilds you are, but even Ash Barrens in a pinch, you can lay that down and then play a colored mana and a generic for something. And yeah, it's stuck on the field unless you got a bounce land, but if the payoff is high enough, you don't care.
Yeah. I think that's the biggest boon of this mana base is that it's much more smooth and consistent, and it allows it to support very aggressive strategies.
Yeah, I would recommend using this mana base if you're basically a monocolor deck, but you have a couple of cards thrown in that you don't think you're gonna be casting a lot of. Like if you're like base white and you have splash red, and you don't think that you're gonna end up needing to go red spell, red spell, red spell, or something all in one turn. If you just think, okay, maybe like one red spell a turn is fine, and I can just go tutor for that one or two mountains that I have in my deck, and then most of the rest of the time you're going to be getting just basic islands, your deck is going to work much more smoothly than something that's trying to use dual lands because they have a high color weight in two colors.
Right.
This mana base also supports Delve really, really well because your lands are the Ash Barrens and the Terramorphic are going into the graveyard, which you can do all kinds of things with. If you're a graveyard based deck, maybe they save your key card from a Relic of Progenitus or something. Do you think the deck thinning is significant enough to consider when constructing a mana base?
I don't think it's significant enough that it would sway you in one direction or the other. I think it's more just like the cherry on top. So, for example, if you've got a really lean, fast, aggressive deck, and you want to lean towards this Evolving Wilds, Ash Barrens, basic lands type of mana base, the deck thinning that you get from this is just sort of an added bonus. But you're not going to go and take a more color-intensive, mana-heavy deck and try to run this same mana base when you've got, two or maybe even a third color just for the deck thinning. Like it's not enough of a thing that I'm going to let it sway my decision, but it's something to be cognizant of, and it's something that is relevant. But
I think you're totally right. One thing that I do think that these lands do passively that I think it is worth considering going this route is if you're doing some kind of brainstorm ponder, like if you're playing casting brainstorm or ponder, the shuffle effect I do think is worth it.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah, 100%. When your mana base is letting you take advantage of um, downsides on your other spells, biggest example, like you said, is Brainstorm. You're taking the two worst cards out of your library or out of your hand, putting them back on top of your library, and then you've got to draw them over the next 2 turns. I mean, unless you have an Evolving Wilds or an Ash Barrens, you can just shuffle away the chaff out of your hand, and then you're just left with the most potent spells, for the for whatever purpose you need, right? Like,
absolutely.
it allows for much more card selection, much better card selection, I should say.
Another point that I've seen people use this mana base for is you can recur those lands out of your graveyard. There's no real deck in the format that's doing that right now. But we do have Pulse of Marasa and like Tilling Treefolk to go and get these lands again. And Tilling Treefolk and Pulse of Marasa also work with cycling lands. But nobody's really gotten that to work yet. So maybe that's something something our viewers would like to try. I've tried it before. It is very difficult.
I do it in Tortured Existence with Tilling Treefolk.
Oh, right. I forgot that Tortured Existence plays Tilling Treefolk at all, because that card does come in and out based on how greedy you are.
Right, and I like the Tilling Treefolk because I was also brewing around with using retrace cards. So I had a copy of Sen's Enlistment in my deck.
Spicy.
Yeah, it wasn't good. I just found that, like, if I'm killing them with Sen's Enlistments, like, I'm probably better off just devoting my time to recurring Gurmag Anglers over and over again. But anyway, it was worth a try. I like Sen's Enlistment. It's one of my favorites. It's one of my pet cards, and so I had to try it. But if you want to win, I wouldn't recommend it. At least in a Tortured Existence shell. I don't know. Maybe there's something for Sen's Enlistment out there, but Battle Screech is probably just better.
Yeah, I've seen people go for it. It's usually in like white, black, like Pestilence decks that just want to keep getting creatures out there. But I think I would avoid it.
Yeah.
The last thing, do you have any other points on that, or?
No, I was going to say, if you're ready to move on, let's talk about the non-basic lands.
One more thing with the basic mana base.
Fine. One more. That's it.
Sorry.
One.
I'm sorry.
Okay, go.
You can support snowlands.
Hey, those are good.
Those are very good. You can go. It's Scred is the only card that cares.
Yeah.
But Scred is amazing.
Yeah, Scred is a very good card.
Okay, now I'm ready to move on.
Yeah, we've probably beaten that horse enough. Scred is. Yeah, so let's mark through then for the listeners the type of non-basic lands available to us and the types of mana bases we can construct. So one of the first big ones are the artifact lands. And these come with a huge payoff if you are playing decks that utilize any of the artifact-related mechanics, Metalcraft, and particularly Affinity for artifacts. Because when you're playing a card with Affinity in its text box, your Tree of Tales is a green Ancient Tomb.
Yeah.
That doesn't deal you any damage. Like,
the thing is, the second mana that produces to make it an Ancient Tomb, it can do that as many times as you want in a turn.
Yeah, so
you don't have to tap it for that other effect.
Right, it's going to carry on. So I mean that one Tree of Tales, it'll tap for its green mana, but it could generate, I say generate, but I mean more in the sense of virtually generating extra mana for you by
Producing.
essentially reducing the cost of your artifact.
These are my favorite cards to brew with. I'm a huge artifact player. I've brewed several. I think I've done almost every color combination there is with artifact lands to try to see if it can work. I've tried like mono black and everything. And my tips for this is make sure your payoff is worth it. Basically, if you are playing an artifact land mana base, your game one needs to be like 60% or above win percentage because the hate is so strong. And that's what you got to consider is if you're doing okay and then they lay down Gorilla Shaman, which is why people run it, is it's so good against these lands, and then they just blow up all of your lands besides Darksteel Citadel, the indestructible one. Can you keep going? Probably not. You might want to mix these in with all of your other lands. I think that's what Boros Monarch does. They run like their payoffs are like Glint Hawk and things like that, and Galvanic Blast, like these super powerful cards if you have a bunch of artifacts. But it gives it you're building your own Achilles heel for that extra power.
Yeah, I definitely agree. The artifact lands are probably individually the most powerful lands in terms of what they can enable, but they also come with the biggest drawback. Another type of land that kind of falls into the vein of artifact lands, they're kind of niche in their role, are the Tron lands. And so those lands are the three: the Urza's Mine, Urza's Tower, Urza's Power Plant. And when you have one of each in play, you can produce 7 colorless mana from those 3. So these lend themselves to big mana strategies, but they're not necessarily lands like the artifact lands that you could just throw into any deck.
Yeah, and pro tip, if you are playing Tron lands, just play Expedition Map. Like you can brew around like building your own Tron mana base, and almost always you just want that. You just want to just be able to tutor the card you want. And Expedition Map it's not used in any other style of deck that I've seen besides Tron.
Yeah. Other lands that also sort of fit their way into Tron mana bases are the filter lands. And they kind of allow the Tron decks to not only play big mana spells, but also to play a range of colored spells.
Like the filter lands are so great in the Tron deck. Like I can't even believe how good they are because they're so bad otherwise that when you get them in Tron, you're like, these cards are bad, right? And then you get them in there and you're like, it's turn 2. This shouldn't be good, but tap my Tron land, trap my filter land, Flame Slash, and it just feels great. I wouldn't play him in any other deck though.
Yeah, because they're filter lands, right? So we've got to pay a generic mana into it, tap it to get a colored mana out. So it's something that the Tron decks can take advantage of because they've got a lot of 6 mana spells and 5 mana spells that they can tap their 3 Tron lands, generate 7 mana, take one of those colorless, put it into a filter land, and they're not wasting any of their mana. It's being used efficiently.
When you're building with Tron lands, I would say it's important to try to build your deck so that if you don't get Tron, your deck still functions in some way. because it's really easy to just be like, oh, I'm just going to jam all these expensive cards in my deck, and then it ends up just biting you because they played a single Molten Rain, and now you're going to take an extra 4 turns to find that other piece.
Yeah. So those are a couple of the land types that lend themselves to specific archetypes. But let's talk a little bit now about the more broad types of land. And these are mostly the dual lands. So these are lands that obviously you can you could realistically put into any deck. There are a few archetypes and strategies that you probably shouldn't. You should probably go with the basic land mana bases that we talked about earlier. But so let's talk about the variety of dual lands available to the Pauper format.
Okay, the first one are the gain lands, and I want to say that they're the best because they have that effect of slowing your deck down. And I would usually recommend these for a slower deck just because of that. But they also have the built-in buffer against that of gaining you a life. Maybe it's not huge, but you know, starting at 23 does matter sometimes.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many times like I've played a turn 1 gain land, a turn 2 gain land, you know, and then like a turn 3 gain land, and I play slightly off curve every time, you know, but you still have access to removal, like, you know, disfigure on 1, and then you have a cheap counter spell on 2. And so you're playing off curve, so I'm disfiguring something on my turn 2 and then countering something on my turn 3. And my opponent's probably going to get a few hits in, but like after a couple hits, I'm at 19 as opposed to, you know, 16 or 15. And that makes a huge world of difference.
I have tried to brew 3-color decks, and they, you know, they kind of work. It feels like they're just like almost right there. And I feel like just loading up on dual lands is just great for that. Maybe like it's really hard to say because no one's really perfected how to make a 3-color mana base in Pauper besides just don't build a 3-color mana base in Pauper. I don't know. Is there anything else you want to say about the gain lands?
No, not really. They're great in conjunction with our next set of dual lands, which are the Ravnica bounce lands.
And
So
I think for both the dual lands and the bounce lands, the really integral turn is pretty much turn 2. Can you, like, I think a big question is, have you built your deck so that when you have to play a bounce land on turn 2, can you interact in some way? So I think one mana spells tend to be really, really good with these mana bases.
yeah, like the deck that I think of when I think of this dual land bounce land mana base is blue black alchemy decks. And in a deck like that, I recommend playing a lot of disfigures, like minimum 3. I would feel like for this very reason of I need to be able to play a tapped land on 1, untap, disfigure their first play, and then play my Ravnica bounce land and utilize that mana. Otherwise, you're essentially just wasting that mana. And then when you think back on it, like you didn't do anything on turn 1, and now you're not doing anything on turn 2, even though you had that untapped mana, and you've wasted 3 mana this game.
I think another really interesting effect that the bounce lands have, and it's kind of a conundrum to me, is they help you hit land drops.
Yes.
Because you're returning that land to your hand, and they do tap for 2. which, of course, you can abuse of things like snap, like Familiars does, which is like that's not a super common thing outside of that deck, but it is a very powerful thing to do with them.
Well, we talked earlier about ways we can reduce the land count in our deck, and having Ravnica bounce lands is one of those ways. Because, like you said, it produces 2 mana, and then you're still going to make your next land drop because of the land that you return to your hand. And when you return a land to your hand that you've already used that turn for mana, you really aren't behind, except for, you know, the 1 land that you're putting into play tap that turn. So you're still behind in the sense that you're playing tap lands, so you're not playing completely on curve, but you're not behind on land drops because this land taps for 2. And so the next turn when you untap, you have a big advantage, you know, in that you're back up to par. And that's just an easy way you can reduce your land count. Because you draw a bounce land, as long as you have 1 other land to go with it, you essentially have 3 lands.
One super tricky thing about these bounce lands are deciding how many you want to put in your deck, because those are all powerful effects. Like, I don't want to miss a land drop and stuff, but these can't be the only land in your hand. Without another land, it's a lot like Vesuva, except it's even worse because you can't copy their land. If all you have in your hand are bounce lands, that's an instant mulligan. You essentially can't make land drops. So right. I would say it's not a hard and fast rule, but I think putting 4 in your deck, it's gonna bite you unless you have a lot.
I think that 4 is kind of the sweet spot.
Really?
Yeah. Well, the decks that I'm thinking of that want to play bounce lands and dual lands, they're decks that are more heavy, like the mana weight, and the curve is probably also a little higher too. So those are the kind of decks that I think of are playing a minimum 22 lands. In my blue-black alchemy list, I've even gone up to a 23rd land because hitting all my land drops is so vital. I don't think you want to ever play more than 4, but yeah. I think 4 is a great number. Because those are the, I like 3. 4 is that number that you want to hit 1 to 2 every game, especially when you've got the gain lands in your deck and you want to be utilizing that extra life gain.
I end up taking them out of my deck when I keep getting openers that just have them. I'm just like, I have to fix this. I can't keep doing this. It's the risk. The risk versus reward is like the reward. Yeah, I get those extra land drops versus the risk of I just lose. My opening hand just makes me have to mulligan and mulligan again. Okay, I've lost.
Nah, I feel like that's more variance. Like, you shouldn't, if you only have 4 in your deck of, we'll say 21 to 22 lands, like the odds of you having to mulligan that often because your 1 lander was a bounce land, like you're probably mulliganing that hand regardless of what that land was. But even if you have your 2 lander and it's 2 bounce lands, you know, the odds of that I think are so minimal that it's worth the return. Like, sometimes you are going to get on the bad side of variance there and you're going to get 2 bounce lands and have to mulligan to 6. But like the odds of your 6 then having 2 bounce lands, like the odds of you seeing double bounce land, you know, in 13 cards is pretty minimal, I feel like. You
don't even have to see double bounce land the second time. It's double bounce land the first time and then maybe just 1 land the second time.
Well, now I don't know. Now we're getting into like the argument of, I don't know.
I think it has the possibility of ruining some hands that with any other hand could be keepable. Anyway, I think we could. This is that's an important deck building thing that I think people are gonna have to decide on their own because.
Yeah, I don't know. I think the numbers and the stats show that 3 to 4 is probably the correct number.
You were right when you said 3, and then you were wrong when you said 4.
I think 4 is fine. I think 4 is fine. I've not really had that problem very often. Like I've had that problem, but like I don't know. If I feel like if I were to go back and run the numbers on the amount of games that were won because of having bounce lands, access to bounce lands and their powerful effects, to the number of games I've lost because I like looked at my 7 and it was 2 bounce lands or 1 bounce land and I had to mulligan, and then I, mulligan into another unplayable 6. Like those odds and that number is just so low that it's just worth the amount of equity you get back.
But then there's also the awkwardness of, I would really like to play this Disfigure and have mana up for Counterspell, but my black is on my bounce land, and then I have an island sitting next to it. So now I can't do both. If he casts a spell, then I can do both right there. But it does make some really awkward turns of, like, it messes up your sequencing because the colors you can't get your colors right when you want them.
Your colors aren't aligned very well, and in sequences like that, you usually just have to take a hit from something, right? And then when they cast a spell, you can go, okay, counter it, Disfigure, which can be kind of awkward. Sometimes you can't afford to take that hit, but you also just can't afford to let their next spell resolve. So the downside of the bounce lands are real, and I think that is a very real downside. I still don't fully agree that your mulligan argument is that big of a downside. I just feel like the odds, the statistics, the numbers behind that, like the probability of it happening isn't so high that it outweighs the probability of the benefits that you get from the bounce lands. But that is definitely one of the biggest issues with the bounce lands, is that they create very clunky, inconsistent turns at times when you're trying to be efficient with your mana, and you can't be for that very reason. And
sorry, what?
Well, I was just going to say that kind of ties into deck design. So if like you're trying to build a deck that utilizes these dual land, bounce land mana bases, you really need to be looking at the CMCs of your spells. You can't have a lot of double colored spells just for that very reason, just because the mana makes it awkward. But the return on having those types of mana bases is high enough that you're willing to make those constraints in deck building.
Yeah, and I think we're coming at this from two different perspectives of, you're pretty much, I think this is what it is. I think you're thinking of these lands specifically in alchemy or teachings, and I'm thinking of them in the broader sense of other decks that aren't quite as slow, or you're trying to be a little bit more aggressive, or you're not playing 23 lands.
Well, if you're playing,
which is that's a deck building.
If you're playing decks like that, like, you should probably just be playing the basic land mana bases. I mean, you could probably play some of the tap gain lands. Like, if you want to be an aggressive deck utilizing your curve, you probably shouldn't have bounce lands. The bounce lands lend themselves to bigger
but not
slower decks,
as much as mid-range and not super late control is what I'm thinking of as well. And I think in those types of decks,
I feel like
2 is probably the right number, maybe even 1.
I might not even play him in a deck like that. Like, I would probably just play Ash Barrens, Evolving Wilds, and 4 of my on-color dual lands. That's probably what I would do. Because all these downsides that you've brought up, they're mitigated in a deck like Alchemy. But
you're probably right.
They're made so much bigger in a deck that's trying to play a little more on curve and be more mana efficient. And the Alchemy decks are built in the way that they can take advantage of that awkward clunkiness that comes with the dual lands. So they've taken that weakness and sort of removed it from the equation. Whereas these other decks, like if I'm thinking like Boros Monarch, like they don't play Boros Garrison, do they?
Yeah, they play a full 4 actually.
Do they? Oh, okay. Well, maybe I'm just eating my
That's
words right now.
yeah, that's why I'm like I'm kind of coming around because I was like thinking about like what mid-range decks do we have, and then I was like, oh, Monarch, and then I was like, oh, they play 4.
Yeah.
So I'm probably wrong.
I don't know. And maybe I'm just wrong, but maybe this is an innovation that just hasn't taken place yet. Where before, like all we had were bounce lands, right? For the longest time, all this format really had were the bounce lands, and then we got the guild gates, and then we got the gain lands. But now that we have cards like Ash Barons, and the gain lands, and there's just all this new technology that has been introduced into the format for creating mana bases.
Yeah.
Maybe the bounce lands are becoming more of a crutch that we were leaning on because it's all we had. I still think that they're great in these slower control decks, but I don't know, maybe an innovation that needs to be made to our mid-range decks like Boros are removing these bounce lands, but
we're cutting back
on them and playing more Ash Barons. I'm gonna go look at a deck list really fast. Do they don't play Ash Barons, do they?
No.
Okay. Yeah.
They don't have enough really basics to support it, I don't think.
Right.
The last thing I want to cover with these bounce lands, and you can stop me if you want to cover something else, is you can abuse ETB effects of lands. So like jamming one Bojuka Bog in your deck, like all of a sudden you can repeatedly get rid of this other person's graveyard if that's what you need to do, as well as the classic trick that I think it sees the most play is the Radiant Fountain. You play Radiant Fountain, you gain 2 life, you bounce it back with your bounce land, and then you get to play it again. So you've gained 4 life with these 2 cards. And that's just fantastic. Like that can really buy you the time you need, especially since almost always your deck is going to be the slower deck. Some other things that you can return are like cycling lands. Like if you need early to just play that cycling land just to either get it on the table so that you have something to bounce with your bounce land, or now I want the card, but I was forced to play this earlier. I'm just gonna float a mana, return it to my hand, use that same mana to cycle that, and that also works with Ash Barons. You can play your Ash Barons, float the mana, next turn, float the mana, and then go get another land with it. And so, like, there are some really smooth things that the bounce lands can do.
Yeah, they're definitely really powerful, but again, I think that they lend themselves to a very specific role. I don't think that they're the type of land that you just throw into any deck.
So I'm ready to move on to effect lands, is what I've called them. So to start off with, I have the cycling lands, and we have, in every color, we have 3 options. We have the lands that tap for a color, and then with that same color, you can cycle them. We also have lands where they tap for a color, and you have to pay 2 colorless instead of that colored mana to cycle them. And then we have the deserts, which aren't good.
Yeah, I remember we were kind of looking at them when Almond Kit came out to see if there was something we wanted to utilize, and I think we just kind of decided that there's not really any payoff for the card type desert, and so you might as well just be playing the onslaught cycling lands.
Yeah.
Your tranquil thickets and your whatever the rest of them are called.
Yeah, and outside of Tron, and even within Tron, a lot of the time you just want to go with the ones that cycle for one colored mana. Because just that two colorless mana is just too steep. So I think that if you're going to play them, just play the ones that cycle for a colored mana, and they'll really add to your late game. And they're good with things like Delve, and if you can recur one of those, it turns a Tilling Tree Folk into a cantrip, or even a divination if you have a couple of them. And by divination, I mean it costs 5 mana. So maybe it's closer to like a
5 mana divination that gives you a 1/3.
Oh, well, so now I can compare that to Muldrifter.
Wow.
Which we know is a very good card.
Yeah, it's not a Muldrifter.
Yeah, it's still not as good as a Muldrifter.
All right, so cycling lands. We've kind of touched on other effect lands. And the synergy between bounce lands. We talked about Radiant Fountain, Bojuka Bog. But what are some other interesting fetch land or effect lands that we can utilize?
So I would say the most played one, I want to say, is Colony Garden. It enters tapped, as most of these. If you have an effect land in Pauper, it's probably going to enter tapped. It can tap for a green, and when it enters the battlefield, you create a 0/1 plant token that does not have Defender, which is really good. So this ends up seeing play sometimes in Boggles, and you can also see it also sees play in Tron. I don't like it in Tron, but sometimes it is just you play a chump blocker, and it holds a Rancor really, really well. You really got to want that creature, though. Do you have any comments on Colony Garden?
Another use of Colony Garden hasn't been utilized in this format, but it kind of makes you edict proof. You can make that and just have a disposable O1. Not, like I said, hasn't been really relevant in this format because our Reanimator decks that are really weak to edicts are typically black-red. And so Colony Garden doesn't fit into that role, but
it is something to think about. So maybe if you're playing a version of Tron that's playing Fangren Marauder, like just a more of a giant creature version, maybe those creatures, you can't afford to lose them to an edict effect. So you play a Colony Garden just as like a crop rotation target, just in case.
Yeah. I think decks that have crop rotation in them are probably the best poised to take advantage of a card like Colony Garden. Because that's like Blowout City when they like edict you and you're like, hey, crop rotation. I'll get Colony Garden, sack my own one, and they're just like, oh okay.
How many matches did you play that tap land just for this to happen?
Oh man, worth it.
So the next one I would like to talk about is Mortuary Mire. It enters tapped. It produces black mana, and it puts a creature from your graveyard on top of your library. I have not had great luck with Mortuary Mire. Giving up your next draw step is a high price for me to pay most of the time. So I usually don't like playing this, but I've really had this give me issues. Like, it's one of those cards where I play it, it doesn't work. They play it, oh, it's great. I just got back my chittering rats, and you're just gonna have to live with it.
Yeah, well, I don't know that saying giving up a draw step is the terminology I would use, because you're still drawing a card. You're just eliminating the randomness, and you're saying this is what I want to draw. And so I think when you activate a card like Mortuary Mire, you really need to be sure that this is the card I want to draw, and you need to go. And that, that's when you're using it. And in the case of a card like Chittering Rats, it's like, I just want to do this. This is what I want to do. I want to Chittering Rats you all day. And that's when a card like Mortuary Mire shines. Or if you like, I think it also goes great with cards that have Evoke. If you got a Mole Drifter in your deck, you can evoke that Mole Drifter. And then later on in the game, get it back with Mortuary Mire. And I would say, on average, Mole Drifter is probably just better than a random draw from the top of my library, right? So
it's I think it's it depends on how many land you're at and how much pressure you're under, but if you feel like Mortuary Mire, like I think it goes super well with Chittering Rats, and I think that's its main use case. So are you ready to move on?
Yeah. Should we talk about Haunted Fengraf?
I want to talk about Quicksand.
Oh,
that was the next one.
Oh, I did skip that one.
Whoops. Yeah, I love Quicksand.
Yeah, Quicksand is fun.
So just some quick notes on Quicksand. Pro tip, you can activate Quicksand after you've been dealt damage as long as you're still in the combat phase. So I think Quicksand's, for me, primary use has been killing Ninja of the Deep Hours. Other than that, killing creatures in Stompy after they can't pump them. So like, oh, you just hit me for 2. Sure. Okay, I'm gonna Quicksand your guy. And they're just like, oh, do I, like, all of a sudden that Vines of Vastwood is really awkward, and it's not supposed to be. But it does come with the cost of it only produces colorless mana.
Yeah. Yeah. But I think the utility behind it is what does make it powerful. Being able to abuse the turn steps, understanding that an attacking creature is still considered attacking until you've moved out of the combat step and into main phase 1 is really relevant when you're playing with a card like Quicksand for the reasons that you've just
and I don't think I said what that one does. It produces a colorless mana. It does not enter tapped, and you can tap it and sacrifice it to give a creature without flying an attacking creature without flying -1, -2 until end of turn.
Yep. That is exactly it. So let's talk about Haunted Fengraf then. So this is a land that doesn't come into play tapped, produces 1 generic mana, and you can pay 3 generic, tap it, sacrifice it, return a creature card at random from your graveyard to your hand. So this, I think, is a little better than Mortuary Mire in that it's card advantage. You're getting an extra card, but then it does have that element of randomness to it.
Yeah, I haven't seen that matters so much. I have been like, oh, I got the card I don't want, but usually this sees play in things like Tron, where your creatures are really high impact, and it's like, like I'm either getting an Ulamog's Crusher, a Mnemonic Wall, or
a Dinrova Horror.
Yeah, or like a Mole Drifter, and like all those are good options if you have the mana and you don't like losing the land on your board. Yes.
Right. And that's exactly the point that I wanted to touch on with this card. You want to play it in a deck with high impact creatures. You don't want to play it in a deck like a high synergy deck where you're utilizing cards like Sakura Tribe Elder or Satyr Wayfinder. Like, you don't want to put it in a graveyard deck that is utilizing little creatures like that, because you have a high probability that you're just going to get a Satyr Wayfinder back instead of that Gurmag Angler that you were hoping for. And in a case like that, you'd probably just rather play Mortuary Mire.
Yeah. This last card, I'm just going to touch on very briefly because it's unique. It's Cradle of the Accursed. And it comes in untapped, produces a colorless mana. And I'm not staring at the card, but I believe it's you pay 3 and tap it, and you get a 2/2 black zombie creature token. This is the only card in Pauper that is a land that makes a dude. Like all the other ones, you have to get a creature from your graveyard or something like that. This one just makes a dude. It's not very good. Any other thoughts?
You missed one point on its text box, and I think this makes it really relevant in terms of how playable this card actually is, and that is activate this ability only anytime you could cast a sorcery.
Oh, right. Yeah. And that really hurts it.
Right. Because you don't now have the surprise factor of what am I holding my mana for? And then if they don't do anything relevant, I'll just make a 2/2. You know? You got to do it main phase, and then your shield's down, and your opponent, it just knows what's going on. And you give away all that information of, what you were planning to do with your mana.
Yeah, it's just not great.
Yeah,
so I'm ready to.
Yeah, I don't like this card.
I do want to cover the. I don't know what to call them besides the 2 mana lands, and I think the most notable one is Peat Bog. I'm just gonna
I feel like
real quick so I can read it off.
I feel like these had a name, but they're the ones with the weird depletion counters. Yeah, and when they don't have a depletion counter on them, you sacrifice them.
So I'm gonna read this.
Okay.
Peat Bog comes into play tapped with 2 depletion counters on it. It has tap. Remove a depletion counter from Peat Bog. Add 2 black mana to your mana pool. If there are no depletion counters on it, sacrifice it. So I've seen 2 use cases for lands like this, and there is a whole cycle for every color. One is land destruction. It like in like mono black land destruction, it means that on turn 2, a lot of the time, as long as you play that Peat Bog first turn, you can cast a 3 mana land destruction spell. Like the only other way to do that would be something like Dark Ritual, which I think you're also playing in that deck. But if you really got to get to something and the payoff is high enough, it's worth it. A great thing that it does is it works really well with Gurmag Angler, because in a single turn, it can produce 3 mana by... If you run out of depletion counters, it'll go to the graveyard. You've produced 2 mana, so 1 land has produced 3 mana, which is really rare. The other use case is Reanimator, and that's also just the same case of the spells you're casting have a high enough payoff that you don't care if you lose the land. You just need to do it as quickly as possible.
Yeah. The other cool thing about these is, unlike the bounce lands, these are actually ramp. So you're behind the turn you play them because they come into play tap, but that next turn, if you can play another untapped land, you've ramped yourself an additional mana, which makes them quite powerful in decks that are poised to take advantage of that effect. Especially with, like you said, like land destruction. Like if you can ramp out a land destruction spell and, still do something else with the rest of your mana, and you're just like miles ahead. But
so I believe that's pretty much all of the lands that are relevant. I think we can skip things like Crumbling Vestige and the Panoramas.
Yeah.
And things like Holdouts. The Panoramas, they're like fetch lands that when they enter.
No, I know what they are. I was saying I don't know that those are even playable.
Yeah, they're not. They're not playable. Other things are like Holdout Settlement, which is the same as Survivor's Encampment. You can produce a colorless mana, or you can tap a creature and tap it to produce any color mana. You can really get stuck on those if people don't play them. The Border Posts, I haven't seen those in years. It's just nobody plays them.
Yeah.
And then the last one is Rupture Spire / Transguild Promenade. And they cost an extra mana when they play, but they always produce any color of mana.
Right.
And it's just not worth it. It's too slow.
Well, and they come into play tapped as well, don't they?
Oh, they do, yeah.
So they come into play tapped, and then you have to pay a colorless mana into them. So you're not only behind your land drop that turn, you're behind an additional mana that turn. So it really just sets you back. And there's just more efficient ways to get the mana fixing than using these.
So I believe that's basically everything. And I would just like to note that I have seen really good mana bases that are mixing things.
Mm-hmm.
Like they play a couple of gain lands, or they play like 4 gain lands, maybe like a couple of bounce lands or no bounce lands, and then they end up playing Ash Barrens, just because like they're running 8 basics or maybe less, but Ash Barrens still just comes through for them because Ash Barrens is that good.
Yeah, I think that Ash Barrens, if you've got like minimum 3 basic lands in your deck, you should probably play Ash Barrens. Like I would play, like if I had 3 basic lands in my deck, I would still probably play 4 Ash Barrens.
Yeah, unless your color weight was really high, and like there wasn't like no generic mana on your cards.
Yeah,
just in case, like
that's probably a big drawback.
But I think that's going to be rare, and I would just say it's fine to go for it.
Yeah. Anything else you want to touch on with this? Our main topic.
Just after reading all that stuff, it's
just like
I know
overload.
I just know that constructing a mana base in Pauper is one of the most difficult things because there are so many things to consider. We probably argued for 20 minutes just on bounce lands, and if you can put them in your deck or not. It's a very deep subject. Like constructing a mana base in any color or in any format is a very difficult thing to do. And I would say that constructing a mana base in Pauper is an even more difficult thing to do, especially when you have things that can kill you super quick. And then sometimes you need to grind. It's just so many things.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not like a format like, Legacy, where you can get away with having red cards in your deck and cards like Leovold in your deck. Like you can play check pile. Like you can't do that in this format. But it's interesting though. And this is something that I thought about thinking back on some of the most powerful formats that I've seen. One of the most powerful standard formats that I've seen was Khans and Battle for Zendikar, because Khans gave standard the Onslaught fetch lands, and Battle for Zendikar gave them fetchable dual lands. And while people really liked that format, and I thought it was a good format too, I think that the fact that the mana was so good constrained the decks, because instead of having a 2-color deck, there's a good green-black deck, and there was a good Sultai deck, and there was a good Abzan deck, and there was a good Mardu deck. Instead, people just like lumped all the best cards into one deck, and you had 4-color decks. And instead of having 2 different decks, you just had one 4-color deck. And you see that in other formats too, where the mana is so good that you can just jam all the best spells into one deck, and it limits the deck building. And I think in Pauper, the restraints on our mana is one of the things that contributes to the diversity of the format, because we have to be so creative with our decks. We can't just take all the best spells in the format and jam them into one 3-color deck. We're limited to 2 colors. Sometimes we can sneak into 3 colors, but we're mostly 1 and 2-color decks, and that opens up such a huge variety. So instead of having a Sultai deck, we've got a blue-black deck and a green deck. Just the thought I had.
And there's multiple blue-black decks that use different mana bases so that they support different cards, and it's just I think it's all super interesting, and it's why I love Pauper. Yeah,
agreed. So that was our main topic of the show today, building a better mana base. Hopefully you guys found this just as useful and insightful as I did. I know I've learned a lot just sitting here and talking to Sean about this. Hopefully this helps you when you are, one, brewing, and two, when you're tuning your own decks and trying to get them, perfect and tournament ready.
And I know that just doing the research, just getting, making the list I made and writing notes, I feel like I learned something. So I would recommend anybody just try to brew and learn about mana bases.
Yeah, hopefully this was a good level up moment for you guys. That was our goal, so we hope you enjoyed it. But let's shift gears here a little bit, and let's talk about the past week's Pauper Challenge. We'll just jump right into the breakdown of that. So this last challenge results were posted on the 12th. And we'll just start from the first place deck. I'll go down to the 8th place deck. And we'll just kind of discuss them really quick for you guys. So first place, and I want to say this is the first time I've seen this deck in first place, at least since I started doing this cast. But it's Boros Monarch. Second place, we have Is It Blitz. Third place, Boros Monarch again. Fourth place, Mono Blue Delver. Fifth place, Scred Delver. Sixth place, Angler Delver, which is kind of exciting.
Yeah.
I don't know that it's exciting because I've already said 2 other Delver decks, and this makes the third. But it's kind of cool to see the archetype branching out.
Well, we just did, first place Boros Monarch, second place Blitz, third place Boros Monarch again, and then 4, 5, 6 are 3 different kinds of Delver decks: Blue, Scred, and then Angler, which I think is amazing.
I think it's very cool. I don't know. I know it's Delver, and Delver is kind of in the same vein of deck, but they all do very different things. They fight on very different angles. And just to be able to see that variety in an archetype, I think is interesting. So 7th place, then moving on, we've got Stompy. And then in 8th place, speak of the Delver, we've got our 4th Delver. This one's Scred Delver, though. So we've got 2 Scred Delvers, 1 Blue Delver, and 1 Blue-Black Delver in this top 8. So let's just start with the first and third place, I guess. This Monarch deck, which
they're very similar. These 2 lists. I think the biggest, I think that the sideboards are the only difference, and neither of these are playing the card that's definitely not Monastery Mentor, Sinker of the Way.
Neither of them definitely not playing Monastery Mentor.
They're both playing Seeker of the Way, and they are both on.
You mean they're not playing?
So they're not Seeker of the Way. You're right.
Yeah.
But they are playing 4 vials. There's 4 vials, 4 prisms.
And vials and prisms.
Like, one of them has cut one vial, but it's no longer. No, the card I was thinking about was Ichor Wellspring. I was gonna say it's no longer you play one or the other, but yeah, still no Ichor Wellspring. So these are pretty. I want to say these are pretty stock lists. The first one is playing a Bojuka Bog main.
Yeah.
That's spicy.
So one thing I'm noticing now that I'm actually looking at this mana base, and I'm sure people have been yelling at just yelling into
their phones
earlier when I was talking about, why play Boros Garrison in these decks when you could go to a Ash Baron's basic land type mana base. And I think the answer is you are playing 4 Ancient Dens and 3 Great Furnace, because you need those artifact lands. So that takes up basic land slots.
Oh, right.
And the other thing is this deck is playing Radiant Fountains. So you just take advantage of the bounce on Boros Garrison very well. So I think that kind of answers the question. Even though I don't know that it's the most optimal way to build a mana base like this, I think for what the deck is, this is probably better. And so this is one of those examples where it took the deck and then built its mana base around the deck. And Boros Garrison is kind of a necessary evil, I think. And I don't know. I don't play the deck. Maybe Boros Garrison is just great. I look at it and I feel like I want to be playing like as on curve as possible. But with the amount of 1-drops in the deck, I
think
it's probably fine to be playing these bounce lands. But again, they lend themselves to the type of decks. Like this deck just does not have the room to be loading up on basic lands and playing 4 Ash Barrens. So it's got to play the Boros Garrison because of the mana requirements in the deck.
Yeah, and this is a deck that wants to just hit a land drop every turn, because, like we covered at the top of the show, Prophetic Prism is really expensive, Alchemist's Vial is really expensive, and then you got to pop those Thraben Inspector Clue tokens on top of, if you actually have Monarch active, you just need to be able to spend all of the mana on all of these spells to get them out of your hand, or else there's no use for them.
Yeah, I agree. So I'm gonna go back on what I said earlier. You should be playing bounce lands in your Boros Monarch deck.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I mean, that's something I've learned today. Kind of a level up moment for me, right then. So let's talk about this second place deck. And this is just looks like a really straightforward Is It Blitz, you know? It's got the 4 Killing Fiends, the 4 Cyclops, a bunch of cantrips, a few lightning bolts, and then just spells. Ways to make your guy big nasty and kill you dead.
And it is playing like this deck plays Evolving Wilds, and then it plays Swiftwater Cliffs, which I think is interesting. Like, I'm not sure exactly why it wouldn't want just Ash Barrens there.
Yeah, I was kind of looking at that too. And I'm thinking my theory on it is, well, Evolving Wilds. I don't know. Evolving Wilds comes into play tab, but it's one of those scenarios when you look at it and on your go off turn, like you can't afford to spend a mana to cycle your Ash Barrens because you know all your spells you need 1 blue and I need 1 red and then I need whatever.
But you are spending 1 mana because it's entering tapped. Like Ash Barrens, you would just spend the mana, go get the
But
card.
the difference is Evolving Wilds and Swiftwater Cliffs can come into play on turn 1. Ash Barrens can't do that. So I can on turn 1 play my Evolving Wilds or my Swiftwater Cliffs, and then on turn 2 be able to play my Kiln Fiend. I can't do that with an Ash Barrens. And so this deck needs to be so on curve, it can't afford to play a tap land that doesn't come into play on turn 1, which is essentially what Ash Barrens is. So I do think that this is one of the few cases, and I'm really high on Ash Barrens. I think that card is revolutionary in what it's been able to do for mana bases in this format. This is one of those that I look at and I don't want it. But anyway, anything else about this deck? I mean, it's super straightforward. I don't see anything spicy or innovative.
Lava Dart. I don't know. There's a Lava Dart in the sideboard, which is a little bit spicy, but
I don't even know what this card is. So Lava Dart is a red instant. Deal 1 damage to target creature or player, and you can flash it back by sacrificing a mountain.
So yeah, on your go off turn, it can just be 2 spellcasts.
Yeah, and that seems great.
I guess it's really good against elves. Or I guess it is instant, so it could be good against like Spellstutter sprites and things.
Yeah, and it's good against 2 mana creatures too. Like cast it, tap it, sack your mountain, flash it back. I mean, you're still 2-for-1ing yourself, but like if you've got to get a ninja off the table, like you got to do what you got to do, I guess. But so yeah, 3rd place, we'll skip over that because it's Boros Monarch. The deck list is almost exactly the same. This one has 2 copies of Firebolt in it. Other than that, the only differences are in the sideboards. This one has 2 copies of Circle Protection Green, which I guess is just a concession to how popular Elves is becoming.
Yeah. I did notice that the first one has Prismatic Strands in the main.
Oh, yeah, it does. Interesting. I missed that. So, yeah, Prismatic Strands is 2 and a white for an instant. Prevent all damage that sources of the color of your choice would deal this turn, and it has flashback. Tap an untapped white creature you can control. And there's just an abundance of white creatures in this deck to tap for its flashback cost. So that's interesting. I wonder why that's there.
Monarch. They're just trying
you're
to
saving.
preserve.
Yeah, you can. It allows you to attack and then keep your Monarch.
Yep.
Not have to hold back blockers and pillow fort. That's very innovative. I can get behind that.
All right. Are we ready to move on to 4th place?
Yeah.
It is Mono Blue Delver, and it looks like they're on 3 days, a deprive, and 4 snap, and 3 mutagenic growth, which I think that's pretty cool. Mutagenic growth is really good against red spells, and that's, I think, what a lot of the removal in the format is counting, like using a creature and maybe a spell to add up damage, and then mutagenic growth can just blow out your opponent. I think it's really good against
it. It makes your Spire Golems almost unkillable.
Yeah,
like Scred's got to have 6 lands in play to deal with your Spire Golem.
Yeah, and they can't tell if it's coming or not.
Right, because they can tap out for it, and as long as they've got more than 2 life, they could mutagenic growth you. Plus the fact that, I don't think anyone's ever played mutagenic growth in a deck list like this. He probably got so many free wins just off the back of he's tapped out, and people play around days and then get mutagenic growth.
And then after your first one, they're just living in fear.
Right? You just put the fear of God right into their soul.
The only other thing I would note is they are running 4 gut shot in the board, and I think that again is an answer to Elves. It is also good against.
I find it interesting
other
that
spell sorter sprites.
He's maxed out on gut shots, but doesn't have any Oh, sorry.
Oh, it's mono blue.
He's mono blue. Yeah. I realized that right as I was about to say Electrickery. He's mono blue. So gut shot's probably great.
He has 4 gut shot, and then he has 2 piracy charm.
I kind of like gut shot better than piracy charm, but
piracy
charm does have the mobility.
He's a options. 4 on the gut shot, so he just wanted 2.
He just wanted more ways to kill stuff. Yeah,
and I'm sure he takes out those mutagenics against elves and things. So why not just go up on the removal more?
Yeah,
probably better than serrated arrows.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, for this deck probably. Let's look at 5th place. So this is a deck that could play Electrickery and rightfully is. We're looking at blue-red Scred Delver. So
it's a pretty stock list. It's on 4 Scred, 3 Lightning Bolt.
Yep, and I think that's the correct innovation. For a long time, it was 4 bolts, 3 Screds, and I think that the format has evolved in such a way that 4 Screds is the go-to. This deck
go back and forth. I don't think it's necessarily this is where we're at now. I think this is just
I think it's decision. We're seeing the decision more and more, and I think that it's correct to be playing 4 Screds, just because I think of where the format's at. The creatures are getting bigger, and We just need the answer to be efficient. And when I look at a deck like Blue-Red Delver, a lot of times a deck like this is a burn deck, right? I don't think that this deck is a burn deck like other Delver decks are in other formats. Like if we thought about what Blue-Red Delver was in Legacy and Modern during the Treasure Cruise era, that was essentially a burn deck, and there's no way you would play less than 4 lightning bolts. This deck, I don't think you're ever getting to a point where you're just like, I'm going to get them down to 9 and then bolt them out of the game. You're using your lightning bolts as removal spells because you're so reliant on tempo and artificial card advantage. And so Scred is just, you just want the most efficient, powerful removal spell possible. And especially in a format here where there are so many 4 toughness creatures, so many Gurmag anglers. If the format ever devolved into something where we weren't seeing those big creatures, then you would play 4 lightning bolt for the upside of being able to burn things out. But that's just not where the format is. And so I think Scred is correct to max out on.
Okay, yeah. Do you think there's ever a scenario where we do Firebolt, just sorcery speed,
Maybe,
and like maybe just the 2 drops? I don't think we're anywhere near that, but
Firebolt is shock with flashback.
Yeah, it is sorcery speed,
right?
And it has flashback of 5, and it's 2 damage.
Yeah,
you'd have to. I think elves would have to be taking over the format. And then even against elves, like it doesn't kill the Huntmasters, Lissalana Huntmasters. So
right. It doesn't
so
kill
I don't think that'll ever happen. I
don't know. I don't know about that. Especially not when, game 2 you have access to sideboard cards like Electrickery.
All right,
yeah. Anyway, should we move on to 6th place? This is what I'm kind of excited to look at. So this is the blue-black, the Gurmag Delver. So this is 3 Augur Bolus, 4 Delver of Secrets, 4 Gurmag Anglers, and a 5th Delver of Secrets in the form of Sultai Scavenger. Just a 1-mana, 3-powered flyer. This one may be even better because it's got 3 toughness instead of 2.
Yeah, really, it can fight those mole drifters profitably.
Yeah.
So I'm looking through the board, and I was expecting to see some kind of Forbidden Alchemy or something like that, but it just looks like they're using Mental Note Thought Scour, and I think I think that's great.
Yeah, to fuel your delve.
Yeah, like it keeps the curve really low, and I think that's exactly what you want in a Delver deck.
So this is bizarre to me, and maybe card availability or something played into this decision. But he has 3 copies. Oh, never mind. I just found it. I'll blame my dyslexia for this one. I couldn't find Counterspell in the deck list, and all I could see were 3 Deprives, but I found Counterspell. I don't know that I like Deprive very much, honestly. I would rather play more like Disfigures. Maybe like an extra copy of Echoing Decay or something. I don't know.
I want to say that the Deprives are probably better than you might give them credit for. The blue is steep, but I think it's fine because they don't have any of those like 3-mana Forbidden Alchemy. Like everything in the deck can be cast for 2 mana.
Yeah.
And so I think just like you don't care about hitting 3. Like, well, you do care about hitting 3, but if you counterspell something with your counterspells 5 through 7, I think it's just worth it, and I like it.
Okay. Yeah, I guess with the efficiency of your creatures, every creature in your deck is 1 mana except for Augur. So
your other options are play like Remove Soul or Prohibit. And
yeah, I see, and I would rather just play more removal if I was going to be cutting the deprives, but I can see how in the context of this deck, deprive looks pretty good.
I think the removal wouldn't do the same job because you're trying to protect your angler and your delver.
Right, but remove soul wouldn't do that either.
Right,
So
yeah, and that's
you might
why
as well
I'm
just be
all in on the
playing.
deprive.
Like if you're playing remove soul, I'd rather be playing removal because I'd rather be able to top deck this and deal with your threat on board than like top deck remove soul and be like, well, he's already resolved his ninja the deep hours, so I guess I'll take another hit, you know. But in the context of this deck and with what it's aiming to do, it's aiming to protect its efficient threats. Deprive seems fine. You've talked me into it. One thing that I would look into changing is I would cut the Halimar Depths and the two Terramorphic Expanses, at least the two Terramorphic Expanses, and I would play 2 to 3 Ash Barons in this deck.
Yeah,
and
I'm not sure
I might
why
look
they made
into
that decision.
I might look into cutting down on like cutting out the think twice and some of this extra fluff and playing a couple copies of Brainstorm.
So the reason I've seen somebody do this before, and I hate Halimar Depths.
Yeah,
the reason they're playing it is because it has a great interaction with Thought Scour and Mental Note. They can choose which card they want to keep. Oh, they look at the top 3. They say, "Oh,
which card they want."
Yeah, maybe they want 2. Yeah, and then they eventually just draw that, and then Thought Scour away the rest.
Or the inverse, Thought Scour away the 2 you don't want, and then draw the 3rd.
Or yeah, which the sequencing is kind of tricky, but
right. Okay, that's cool. I can be on board for that. I don't know that I'm super high on it, especially I struggle putting tap lands into a deck with Delver of Secrets in it, and I can make the sacrifice for the Dismal Backwater because I think that is necessary for the mana requirements of this deck. I'm not a fan of having a single blue source that comes into play tapped. The synergy with Think Twice and Thought Scour Mental Note is cute, but I don't know. I have a really hard time getting behind wanting to play a Delver deck with tap lands in it, which is one of the big reasons why I have shied away from these Gurmag Delver decks. I just
it is very cute.
Yeah, I like my and it's one of the reasons why I think the blue Delver deck is the best Delver deck among Delver decks is because the mana is so efficient.
I think it's just. Have you seen my good friend Gurmag Angler? Because
that card's that card's good. For sure. Yeah, and I mean that's the namesake card, Gurmag Delver. So, yeah, I mean, Gurmag Angler is the upside of black in here, and for the deck's mana requirements, you've got Agony Warp, Counterspell, Doom Blade. You've got really strict mana requirements, so you need Dismal Backwater. But I don't like Halimar Depths.
The only other thing I would like to mention is it has a pretty stock sideboard with a Crypt Incursion, 2 Hydroblast, 2 Relics, 4 Stormbandgeist, 2 Doomblade, a Dispel, a Shrivel, and then the card that I'm interested in is Rancid Earth. So Rancid Earth is a sorcery. It is 1 colorless and 2 black. It says destroy target land, and if you have Threshold, it says destroy target, or instead destroy that land, and Rancid Earth deals 1 damage to each creature and each player. So it's like it's symmetrical, but it's like an Electrickery stapled to Stone Rain.
So do you want this, I'm assuming, against elves?
I think that there's a lot of matchups that you're going to bring in Rancid Earth for. Like I could see bringing it in against Boros Monarch. Really anything with a bounce land in it, you can get value there.
It's probably
Uh,
great against like Scred Delver. You know,
yeah,
they only have 2 mountains. Kill one of your mountains, wipe away all your little fairies.
yeah. At that one damage, I think it's gonna put in work.
All right. Cool. Well, that was Gurmag Delver. Let's talk about the 7th place deck list, which your favorite, Green
Yeah,
Stompy.
yeah. I haven't seen this in a top 8 in a while. I want to say, have we?
Um,
I mean,
I feel like there was one a couple weeks ago. I feel like honestly, if you go down and look into like the top 16 and the top 32s, this deck is everywhere.
okay, yeah,
Because it was really high last time when we did our power rankings. It was pretty high on the power rankings, despite only having like one top 8 appearance. Um, but it made tons of top 16s, tons of top 32s. Just for some reason, it struggles to crack into the top 8 of these events, which I'm thankful for,
yeah.
honestly. I've been on my soapbox about this deck before, so I'm not going to get there again, but
Uh,
the world would be a better place if Solana Ledgewalker disappeared. Just my 2 cents.
it's in a world filled with delvers and fairies. I don't think Silhana Ledgewalker is the biggest deal. I guess when you put something on it,
I just don't like that card. It tilts me.
yeah, it's really
It
strong.
just tilts me. Like, I don't know. I get that it's not like the mainstay of the deck. Like the main driving force of this deck is Burning Tree Emissary and just the explosive draws that it enables. But you know, if my opponent goes like Burning Tree, Burning Tree, Burning Tree, Burning Tree, Nest Invader, I'm like, cool, that was sweet. But if they go like turn 2 Solana Ledgewalker, I'm just like, this is stupid. What is this?
Because you're in a race. You're in a race now that you can't interact with.
Yeah, I've now gone from we're playing an interactive game of Magic to you're gonna untap, put an Elephant Guide on it, and then next turn you're gonna put a Rancor on it, and then you're gonna bump it with Vines of the Vastwood, and there's nothing I can do about it. And
yeah,
like,
you're right.
It doesn't promote fun gameplay. I don't know.
Blue is just supposed to win every game, and when a green deck can win, it feels weird. So ban
that's not what bothers. It doesn't bother me that it's
onto the sideboard.
All right.
This is the simplest sideboard.
I like it.
Top 8 by far. 4 Epic Confrontation, 4 Scattershot Archer, 4 Gleeful Sabotage, and 3 Viridian Longbow. That's a lot of longbows.
Yeah. I don't know. I like it. This deck knows what its plan is, and it knows, what it needs, and it's just very streamlined.
Yeah, and I think it's just maxed out on the cards that are going to just turn a game into really not a game. Just, land enough Scattershot Archers, Delver's done, cast enough Gleeful Sabotage, Affinity's done. I don't know exactly what the Epic Confrontation is for, but I'm sure it's great.
It's just a way to fight through other mid-range decks. It's probably great in the mirror. It gives the +1, +2. It just makes your guys on average bigger than everything else they have. And so it almost just turns it into a one-sided fight. Like a one-sided just punch your creature, get it off the board.
Yeah, and it is that extra point of damage when you do attack.
True. Yeah. That sometimes can be relevant. It could change a clock. So
yeah.
Let's go to 8th place. I don't know that we need to talk a lot about it. It's Scred Delver again. The only difference in this deck list is in the sideboard. This one has 2 copies of Swirling Sandstorm. And so that card is a 3 in a red sorcery, has Threshold, no other abilities. So this card doesn't work if you don't have Threshold. But it says Swirling Sandstorm deals 5 damage to each creature without flying. Obviously relevant because our best creatures in this deck have flying. But that's really the only difference between this deck list and the last deck list, I feel like.
Well, the other one had Sandstorm as well.
Oh, did it? Oh, it did. Whoops. So these deck lists are like exactly identical. I missed that in the first sideboard.
Yes, they look identical to me.
All right. Well, there's your Pauper Top 8 Challenge breakdown.
All right. I think that's all of our subject for the week. So are we going on to what are we playing?
Yeah. Sean, what are we playing?
Well, we're actually playing different decks from each other. So it's like so I'm playing lately a very bad deck, and its name is Vinestorm. I don't recommend it. It's a bad deck, but
is it fun?
So
is it fun?
Yes.
That's all that matters. Magic is about having fun.
And yeah, if you don't know what it is, basically, I don't remember the name of the card, but it has Storm on it. You look for a basic land for each time you cast a spell this turn, and then you're trying to, is it Tolarian Winds? It's a blue and a colorless that you discard your hand and you draw that many cards. And so you've basically found every basic in your deck, which at that point, deck thinning is real. And then Utilitarian Winds, your hand is just full of great spells. You maybe have like 14 cards in your hand, and you cast Inner Fire, which it's 4 mana. It adds a red for each card in your hand. And cycle, Kavarik's Torch, win the game. The problems with the deck is very weak to counterspell, which in a format with so many Delver decks, you can't do that.
Yeah, and Delver decks that are playing extra copies of Counterspell now in the form of Deprive.
Yeah, and even just them spell stuttering a cantrip means there's one less card in your hand, and you need as many cards in your hand as possible to add as many mana as possible. It's just a bad deck, but I love it. I've been enjoying it. What are you playing?
So me, I'll be honest. I've played one game of Pauper in the last week. It's been kind of a busy week for me, and I just haven't had a lot of time to play Magic. I played one match of Commander and one game of Pauper, and I just pulled out my my blue-red Delver. But honestly, I kind of want to try this Gurmag Delver deck out. I want to feel out the waters, take it for a spin. You know, take it out for a night on the town, treat it to a good dinner. You know, make it feel special.
I wouldn't know. I don't know if I would have been on board until I saw the list without alchemy in it.
But yeah, I didn't like alchemy in it when I first saw the deck lists, but I might try to give this list a spin. I'm gonna cut the Terramorphic Expanses and the Halimar Depths and play 3 copies. If I maybe fit in a 4th copy of Ash Barrens, but probably 3, and then maybe see if I can fit a couple Brainstorms into the deck. So anyway, well, that is what I am playing, and that is what Sean was playing. So anything else to talk about before we sign off for the day?
I think we just need to, let's just touch on our sponsor one more time. It is puremtgo.com. Give them a visit if you're looking for any cards on Magic Online. Find us on Patreon at patreon.com/common knowledge. I have just been given access to make posts on there and things, so I plan on doing that. And I believe once we hit, I don't have it pulled up, but once we hit a certain amount of money, we'll have incentives and goals, which is exciting. we haven't really discussed what we're going to do yet, but I have some ideas, and I'm sure right after the show we can talk about those. And I think that's it. Oh yeah, did we say where to find us?
No, that's what I was going to say. Where can the listeners find you if they want to get in touch with you? Tell you how much you suck.
Yeah, if you want to say that I'm completely wrong on bounce lands and we need to be jamming 4 of those into every deck, you can contact me on Twitter at Lobbert, Lobbert 8, the number 8. And yeah, I decided to start up my old Twitter account so that I can talk to people about the show. So find me there, give me a follow, and I will talk to you.
Yeah, if you want to reach out and tell me how much I suck, you can find me on Twitter at bclark_ck. You can reach out to me. I will do my best to reach back out to you. That's where you can find us.
I would love to have.
Are you on the Discord yet?
You know, I clicked to get into the Discord, and it is just a blank box.
I had the exact same thing. Try it again.
So it's got like a glitch. So I'll get in there after the show.
Just try opening up Discord again, but it should work. I had the same problem. But anyway, join the Discord server. I think it's just Common Knowledge, MTG, Common Knowledge. Yes. I'm going to just pull it up and try to look. I think it's just Common Knowledge.
Great radio.
Oh, wow. Discord, now with Scratch and Sniff. That's what Discord said when I opened it up. That's weird. But yeah, I think it's just Common Knowledge.
It is Common Knowledge.
Okay, cool. There's nothing else there. It's just Common Knowledge. So check us out. Find us on Discord. I'm trying to be more active on there. We had a little discussion about like Blue-Black Alchemy and stuff like that. But anyway, check us out on Discord. If you enjoyed the show, support us on Patreon at patreon.com or patreon.com/Common Knowledge. Is that what it was?
Yeah.
Yeah, whatever Sean said 3 minutes ago.
Patreon.com/Common Knowledge.
Bow, bow. So anyway, hey, that's the show this week. That is episode 10 in the books. Next week, we're going to be back onto our regular recording schedule. We'll be back, which is Tuesday. We're going to start trying to record for you guys every Tuesday and then have that published by Wednesday or Thursday, with it being Valentine's week and everything. And Sean felt like he had to do stuff with that for some reason, so we pushed it off to today. But anyway, thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next week. Bye. Bye.